In
They're
a world
behind
where
the
power
desk.
is currency,
Suppress!
the most dangerous fortresses are the ones that look like
Clear that
offices.
corner.
The 63rd floor of Vantage Meridian Tower wasn't a corporate headquarters. It was a throne room disguised as a workplace. Politicians signed favors over imported whiskey in its private conference rooms. Prosecutors quietly buried inconvenient truths somewhere between the third and fourth floor. And men like Hae Mun-Hee came here every morning to remind themselves that they had successfully turned chaos into consequence and blood into board reports. He sat now behind his mahogany desk beneath the cold blue glow of the city below, cufflinks catching the light of a skyline that owed him nothing and feared him anyway. His dark suit was tailored the way weapons are engineered. Precise, without a single wasted element. His face was stone, jaw set, eyes unreadable. The expression of a man who had not been genuinely surprised in over a decade. To the city that watched his name glide across quarterly earnings reports, Hae Mun-Hee was a visionary logistics magnate who had built a global empire from nothing. To the people who whispered his name in back rooms and borrowed warehouses, he was something older and far less forgiving than that. Tonight, he was reviewing shipping manifests at 11:42 p.m. because an empire does not sleep just because its king is tired. Kathleen K. Johnson moved through the office the way a still lake moves, which is to say, she didn't appear to move at all. She was not the kind of woman people noticed immediately. That was, in every sense, a deliberate achievement. Her white button-down was crisp and tucked. Her black pencil skirt was precisely what a secretary's skirt was supposed to be. Her hair was pinned up in a clean, practical bun, and the only remarkable thing about her hands, as they sorted the last of the evening's filing with quiet efficiency, was how perfectly still they were. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of control. She did not hum. She did not sigh. She did not glance at the clock, though she had catalogued every exit on this floor within her first week of employment. Hae Mun-Hee had never once wondered about her. She poured his coffee without being asked, anticipated his agenda before he verbalized it, and had never, not once, flinched when the men with guns came through the private elevator. She was the perfect secretary. That was the point. He was halfway through the third manifest when she paused, it just slightly. Her head tilted a quarter-inch toward the window, and for one fraction of a second, something moved behind her eyes that had nothing to do with filing. Then the glass exploded inward. It didn't break. It detonated. 4 men in matte black tactical gear dropped through the shattered penthouse windows on rappel lines, moving with the synchronized precision of professionals paid very well to not fail. Papers erupted into the air like startled birds. The city's neon lights bled through the jagged opening behind them, blues and pinks and cold whites cutting across the chaos like a fever dream. The lead mercenary was already across the room and driving a blade toward Hae Mun-Hee's throat before the man's hand had even reached the firearm taped beneath his desk. The blade never arrived. Kathleen was already there. She moved from her desk to the space between her employer and his death in a way that should not have been physically possible for a woman who had spent the last 14 months managing calendars. Her body dropped into a combat stance, so practiced it was practically architectural. Feet wide, weight perfectly distributed, white shirt already torn at the shoulder and darkening at the ribs. Her hand snapped up, a tactical blade locked in a reverse grip, and she drove it into the mercenary's attack with enough force to send a shower of white sparks blazing off the metal-bracketed ledger book he used to block. Behind her, a second mercenary was already staggering. She had driven her elbow into his sternum in the same motion as the blade intercept, disrupting him long enough to matter. Hae Mun-Hee stood behind his desk, hands flat against the mahogany, jaw open in an expression that no subordinate had ever had the privilege, or survival prospects, to witness. He looked less like the most feared syndicate boss in 3 time zones, and more like a man who had just realized he had been sharing an office with someone he had never actually met. The woman who brought him coffee every morning at 9 was standing in a combat stance, bleeding, composed, and absolutely in control of a situation that should have ended his life 30 seconds ago. The mercenaries had not been ready for her. Neither had he. But to understand how a secretary became the only thing standing between a Korean mafia boss and a body bag, you need to understand that Kathleen K. Johnson was not born into the quiet life she had been living in that office. She was built, patiently, systematically, in places that do not appear on any government registry, for something much darker. And the man she had been secretly protecting without his knowledge, he was about to discover that his most invisible employee was the most lethal person he had ever been in the same room with. 4 mercenaries came for a mafia boss tonight. They were not prepared for his secretary. Neither was he. Before we start, go ahead and subscribe, like, and share where you're watching from. It always warms my heart to see our little storytelling family stretch across the world. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you give helps us keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. So find your quiet place, settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've never been before. The second mercenary had not gone down. She had bought herself 3 seconds. The elbow strike to his sternum would be telling him to stop. His training was telling him to push through it. He pushed through it. He came at her from the left, weight low and forward, and she was already pivoting to meet him before he had committed to the direction. She let his momentum carry him into the arc of her redirect and drove his face into the edge of the mahogany desk with a crack that echoed off the broken glass. He went down and stayed there. The third mercenary hesitated. That hesitation cost him the initiative. She was already moving toward the desk when her left hand closed around the pair of heavy steel letter openers sitting in the mahogany tray. She had noted them on her first day. She had noted everything on her first day. The fire suppression panel, the desk's blind spot, the 7-second elevator delay, the way the carpet near the east wall absorbed sound differently than the rest. She had filed all of it quietly in the back of her mind and gone back to answering phones, hoping she would never need any of it. She drove one letter opener into the third mercenary's forearm as he raised his weapon, and the gun clattered to the glass-covered floor before the shot was ever committed to. She used the split second of his shock to put him down with 2 precise strikes, throat, then temple, and he folded at the knees with a sound like a tree falling in slow motion. The second letter opener remained in her other hand, ready, as she turned to find the fourth mercenary standing exactly where she expected him to be, between her and the window, reassessing. He was good. She could tell by the way he didn't rush, and he had seen 3 of his team neutralized in under 2 minutes, and instead of charging or braking, he was recalculating. Professional, controlled. His eyes moved from her to the corporate debris field of the ruined office, cataloging the same variables she had. Behind her, she heard Hae Mun-Hee's chair scrape against the floor. "Don't," she said without turning around. He stopped. The fourth mercenary made his move, a feint left that was designed to draw her weight, followed by a rush to the right. It was clean technique. It would have worked on most people. But Kathleen had been trained by an organization that considered most people an acceptable casualty threshold, not a benchmark for performance. She let the feint move through her like water around stone, stepped inside his rush, and drove her knee into his midsection with enough force to compromise his breathing. While he was bent, she locked his wrist, twisted until she felt the structural limit of the joint, and then made a deliberate choice not to cross it. She needed him conscious. She put him against the wall instead, blade at his throat, letter opener pressing into the back of his hand where the nerves ran close to the surface. His balaclava was damp with exertion. His breathing was shallow and controlled. Professional breathing. Trained breathing. "Who sent you?" she said. It was not a question. He said nothing. She applied 6 precise pounds of additional pressure to the nerve point in his hand and watched his face do the math. Still nothing. No words. But his eyes moved. Not much. A fraction of a second toward the rappel lines still swinging outside the broken window, and then quickly back. It was answer enough. Back up, positioned outside. Which meant the window was not a safe exit. She filed that away, released the pressure, and stepped back. The other mercenary, the one she had left breathing near the window, was stirring. She heard the subtle shift of tactical gear against broken glass, and the variables shifted. 2 recovering external backup confirmed outside, the building's internal security potentially compromised. The calculation was simple and ugly. She crossed to Hae Mun-Hee's desk, reached beneath the mahogany surface, and retrieved the firearm that had been taped there since before she ever started working for him. She had known it was there since her first week. She checked the chamber with the ease of familiarity. It was loaded, safety off, exactly as she would have kept it, and held it steady on the recovering mercenary until he read the room and made the intelligent decision to drag himself toward the window. The 4th man followed without a word. They moved the way professionals move when they have decided that a tactical retreat is not the same as a loss. They were wrong about that, but she didn't have time to correct them. The rappel lines snapped taut and they were gone, swallowed by the neon-soaked dark outside. The office was suddenly very quiet, except for the wind. Kathleen stood still for 1 full second, a habit from old training, checking internally for damage. Her shoulder burned where the fabric had torn. Her ribs ached on the left side where she had taken a glancing impact she hadn't fully registered during the fight. She was bleeding from her forearm, a shallow cut from the initial blade redirect. None of it was critical. She had survived worse in rooms with less to work with. She turned around. Hae Mun-Hee was standing behind his desk, both hands still flat against the mahogany, and he was staring at her with an expression she had never once seen on his face in 14 months of employment. He was not afraid. Hae Mun-Hee was categorically too arrogant to be easily frightened. What was on his face was something rawer than fear. It was the look of a man whose entire model of the world had just been quietly disassembled in front of him. "Your coat," she said. "We need to leave in the next 4 minutes." He didn't move. "Mr. Hey." "Who?" he said slowly. "Are you?" She tucked the firearm into the waistband of her pencil skirt with the easy familiarity of someone returning a pen to its holder. Then she looked at him directly for the first time since she had started working for him, without the practiced neutrality of a secretary's expression, without the careful blankness she had maintained every single day in that office. "Someone who just saved your life," she said. "We can discuss the rest underground." 4 minutes. He got his coat. The basement garage beneath Vantage Meridian was not on the building's public schematics. Kathleen had found it on her 3rd day, tucked behind a maintenance corridor that required a keycard nobody on the building's registered staff was supposed to have. She had one anyway, and she had been borrowing small securities for months with no intention of ever using them. Pure instinct from an old life she was supposed to have left behind. The space smelled like concrete and motor oil and undisturbed silence. A single row of vehicles sat beneath a low ceiling, including a matte black maintenance van that she had checked twice in 6 months and found clean both times. She found it clean again now. She started the engine, turned on no lights, and navigated out through a service ramp by memory alone. Hae Mun-Hee sat in the passenger seat with his jaw set and his hands folded in his lap in a rigid approximation of composure. He watched her drive with the focused attention of someone studying a document written in a language they had not yet learned. She drove for 11 minutes before she pulled into a disused parking structure in the manufacturing district, another location she had marked and never expected to use. She killed the engine. The silence came back. "Talk," he said. She was already pulling the torn sleeve of her shirt back to examine the cut on her forearm. It needed to be closed. She found the first aid kit she had stored under the passenger seat 3 months ago. He did not comment on the fact that it was there, and began working on it with the methodical calm of someone who had done this many times, and in far worse lighting. "The men who came through your window tonight were Tier 1 private contractors," she said. "Not syndicate muscle, not police. Someone paid a significant amount of money to remove you specifically, all with a team equipped to handle professional resistance." She paused, applied pressure. "They weren't expecting me." "That makes 2 of us," he said. She didn't respond to that. "Who are you?" It was not the same question he had asked upstairs. That one had been shock. This was Hae Mun-Hee reassembling his authority, trying to reclaim the position of the person asking questions rather than the person who had needed rescuing. "Someone who knows that your internal security is already compromised," she said. "Whoever sent those men knew your office layout. They knew your window reinforcement spec. They came through the exact panel with the weakest anchor points." She taped the bandage without looking at him. "That information doesn't come from outside your organization." The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when an intelligent person receives information they already suspected and had been hoping would stay unconfirmed. "You were trained," he said finally. Not a question. "I was useful," she said, "to people who no longer need to know where I am. That's all you need to understand for now." She rolled her sleeve back down. "What I need you to understand is that calling your security team, your vice president, your board, or anyone connected to your organization in the next 48 hours will get us both killed. Your phone stays off. You go nowhere I don't clear first. You make no decisions about our next move without running them past me." The look on Hae Mun-Hee's face was magnificent in its complexity, and he was a man who had not been told what to do since he was 22 years old. He was also a man intelligent enough to recognize, however reluctantly, when he was the least qualified person in a room. "And if I refuse?" he said. Kathleen finally looked at him fully, the same direct look she had given him in the office, stripped of every professional pretense. "Then you find your own way out of this building," she said, "and I give you about 6 hours." He was quiet for a long moment. "Fine," he said, in a tone that made it clear this was a temporary arrangement, and he had extensive thoughts about it that he was choosing not to express at this exact moment. She took that as sufficient. The tactical gear the 2 neutralized mercenaries had left behind was the thread she needed. By the following morning, working from a secondary location she had never told anyone about, a rented storage unit in a commercial district that she paid for in cash under a name that had not existed since her previous life, Kathleen had begun to pull it apart. Not literally. She didn't touch it without gloves. She photographed it, cataloged the manufacturer markings, documented the serial erasure patterns on the hardware, and cross-referenced what remained with a series of contacts she had not spoken to in over 3 years. People who existed in the spaces between legitimate and illegitimate commerce. The gray market of military surplus and private contracting, where equipment moved without paperwork and origin stories were written after the fact rather than before. She sent 4 messages. 2 came back within 6 hours. The vest rigging was a modified variant of a pattern used specifically by a procurement broker operating out of a holding company registered in Singapore, with subsidiary accounts that had been linked, very quietly and very inconclusively, to 3 separate contract kills in the past 18 months. The broker had a client list that was, obviously, not public. But the supply chain left residue, and residue left trails, and Kathleen had been trained to read trails the way other people read text. The holding company's financial disclosures referenced a logistics partner in the region, a shell within a shell, a company that existed only on paper, with a single registered director, and a business address that turned out to be a private mail facility. But the logistics partner had a name, and the name connected, with 2 careful steps, to a corporate entity she recognized immediately. She recognized it because she had been filing its invoices for 14 months. She sat with that information for a long time in the storage unit's artificial quiet, looking at the wall, while Hae Mun-Hee sat in a folding chair behind her and asked no questions. Because she had asked him not to, and because, for the first time in longer than he would admit, he understood that the most powerful thing he could do in this moment was nothing. She did not tell him what she had found. Not yet. The shape of it was still forming, and she needed it complete before she handed it to him. Some information, delivered too early, became a liability rather than a weapon. Instead, she told him only that the gear had a traceable origin, and that the origin pointed inward. He absorbed this the way still water absorbs a stone, without visible disruption at the surface, and with everything happening underneath. She began to plan their next movement. The shell company's registered agent maintained a physical office, a small, deliberately unremarkable suite in a mid-tier commercial building 40 minutes from the tower. Kathleen drove past it twice before parking, mapped the exits from the street, and identified the foot traffic patterns within 8 minutes. Nothing felt staged. Nothing felt wrong. She had learned long ago that this was the most dangerous reading of all. They went in on foot, Hae Mun-Hee in a jacket that did not match his usual standard, and a cap pulled low enough to be meaningless as a disguise, but useful as a behavioral signal. He looked like a man who did not want to be seen, and which in this part of the city was unremarkable enough to be invisible. She kept 2 steps ahead of him and one hand inside her jacket, where the firearm from Hae's desk sat in a holster she had assembled from materials at the storage unit. The office was empty. Not vacated. Empty in the way spaces are emptied quickly, with small residues of recent occupation left in the haste. A coffee cup still warm on a side table. A chair still angled outward from a desk, as if its occupant had simply stepped away. Papers on the floor that had fallen and not been retrieved. Kathleen stopped in the center of the room. The window behind her exploded. This time she had only half a second's warning. Not from sound, but from the reflection in the blank monitor screen on the desk. A flicker of movement on the fire escape behind the glass. She grabbed Hae Mun-Hee by the back of his jacket and hauled him sideways behind the desk as the first shot punched a neat hole through the drywall where his shoulder had been. The 2 retreating mercenaries from the office, plus 3 new shapes moving through the doorway. 5. A fresh squad, properly deployed with the advantage of ground they had already swept. The odds were bad. Kathleen came up from behind the desk with the firearm, fired twice toward the window to push back the angle, and took stock in the half-second of repositioning it bought her. The desk was not adequate cover. The exit was behind 2 of the new arrivals. The fire escape window on the east wall was uncontested, which meant it was either a trap or an oversight, and she was not in a position to treat it as the latter. She made a decision in the time it takes to draw a breath. She put the gun in Hae Mun-Hee's hand. He looked at it. Then at her. "The 2 near the door," she said. "Keep them occupied. You do not need to hit them. You need them to believe you might." "That is not the same thing." "No," she said. "It is not. Go." What happened next was not elegant. Hae Mun-Hee had not fired a weapon in close quarters under genuine duress in a very long time, and it showed in every technical sense. But what he lacked in precision, he compensated for in the sheer, affronted fury of a man who had spent 43 years building an untouchable empire, and was now crouching behind a cheap office desk being shot at by people he intended to have words with later. He fired. He kept firing. He made himself loud and present and impossible to ignore. The 2 mercenaries near the door focused on him. Kathleen cut through the room like a current through water, present, purposeful, leaving chaos in her wake before anyone had fully registered her passage. She neutralized the first new arrival before he had processed her approach, the second in the moment of his partner's collapse, and used the third's own momentum against him, redirecting his charge into the far wall with a controlled impact that left him dazed and disarmed. The mercenaries from the window were already retreating, again, reading the room the same way they had read it the first time, making the same calculation. They were professionals. Professionals did not die for a contract they could renegotiate. The room was still. Hae Mun-Hee lowered the gun slowly. There was a long scratch across the back of his left hand, where a fragment of something had found him. He was breathing hard. His cap had come off. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, genuinely undone, not by fear, but by the specific disorientation of a person discovering that they are capable of things they had previously only ever paid other people to do. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at the room, then at her. "You need to teach me," he said, "how to do what you just did." "No," she said. "I need you to move. They will regroup." The motel was called something forgettable, with a sign missing 2 letters in the vacancy display. Kathleen paid cash at the window and chose the room at the far end of the building with a sightline to the parking lot and a window that opened onto an alley. Hae Mun-Hee said nothing about any of this. He was learning. They sat across from each other in the room's thin yellow light, and for the first time since the office, the adrenaline ran out completely. What replaced it was worse. Hae Mun-Hee was quiet for a long time. Then, without preamble, he said, "Park Jin-soo." Kathleen looked at him. "My vice president," he said. "He has access to the building's structural schematics. He is the only person outside my direct security team who knows the window reinforcement specifications." He paused. He has also been managing the company's logistics subsidiary for the past 2 years. Independently. I gave him the portfolio because he asked for it, and I trusted him. His jaw tightened fractionally. He is the only person with enough access to route those contracts through a shell company without the accounting flagging it. He said it the way people say things they have known for hours and have been refusing to fully believe. Kathleen had watched the understanding move across his face in the storage unit and had let it arrive in its own time. Now it was here. "Yes," she said. "You already knew." "I suspected. You've confirmed it." He absorbed this without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. She had learned enough about Hae Mun-Hee in 14 months to understand that his composure was not the absence of feeling. It was the architecture he built over it. He was furious. He was also, beneath that, something quieter and more complicated. Betrayal by an external enemy was clean. Betrayal by a trusted subordinate was a different kind of wound entirely. She was about to tell him to rest when something from the second ambush settled into the back of her mind and stayed there. The retreating mercenary, the lead, the one who had reassessed in the office and again in the commercial building. His movement pattern. The specific way he repositioned under pressure. The weight distribution during the redirect. The angle of the feint technique. She had dismissed it as coincidence the first time. She could not dismiss it the second time. She knew that training. She had received it from the same hands. She sat very still in the motel's thin yellow light and understood, slowly and completely, that the mercenaries had not simply been hired to kill Hae Mun-Hee. They had recognized her. In the office, in the commercial building, they had been recalibrating not because her skills surprised them, but because her skills confirmed something. Someone had sent them a profile. Someone who knew what Kathleen K. Johnson looked like when she stopped being a secretary. The organization she had spent 3 years hiding from had just sent her a message. It arrived in the form of 4 mercenaries and a traitor. And it said, very clearly, "We found you." She sat with that for a long moment in the yellow light, turning it over with the same methodical calm she applied to everything. Running had kept her invisible for 3 years. But invisibility had a ceiling, and they had just proven they had found it. If she moved again, they would follow. If she hid again, they would find her again, because now they had her profile, her fighting style, on her face in motion. Every new city, every new name, every new desk would only delay the same outcome. The only move that changed the geometry entirely was to stop moving. To hit back so decisively, so visibly, that the people watching from a distance decided the cost of continuing outweighed whatever they were being paid to finish the job. She said none of this to Hae Mun-Hee. Not tonight. He had enough to carry. She sat with the weight of it herself, in the forgettable motel at the edge of a city that owed them nothing, and she began, quietly, methodically, the way she did everything, to plan for what came next. If this story has you hooked, subscribe and ring the bell right now. The next chapter does not let up. Comment below. Team Kathleen or Team Hae Mun-Hee? Because this partnership is only just getting dangerous. I'll see you in the next one. She let him sleep 3 hours. She didn't sleep at all. By the time gray light was pressing through the motel's thin curtains, the plan had taken its full shape. Running was finished, not as a preference but as a fact. The organization knew her location, her method, her physical signature. Every step away from this city was a step they had already mapped. The only move that changed anything was to stop and force a confrontation on ground she chose, against an opponent she could identify. Park Jin-soo was that opponent. And Park Jin-soo had a problem. He needed Hae Mun-Hee dead before he could consolidate the organization. Every day the hit remained unfinished. His exposure grew. That pressure was the lever she intended to use. She woke Hae Mun-Hee without ceremony. He came alert the way people do when they have spent enough time in dangerous situations to have learned that disorientation is a vulnerability. Quickly, completely, with his eyes already scanning the room before he had fully sat up. She noted this without comment. He was adapting faster than she had expected, which revised her assessment of him upward in ways she hadn't entirely decided what to do with. The charity gala, she said. The Meridian Foundation event. When is it? He looked at her for a moment. 5 days. You were planning to attend. I was planning to send a representative and a check. Now you're attending in person. She sat across from him, elbows on her knees, and laid it out cleanly. Park Jin-soo needs you dead before he can move on the organization. He has contractors who are running out of clean opportunities to finish the job quietly. If you surface publicly, visibly, deliberately, in a controlled environment, and signal that you intend to name your successor at the gala, you give him exactly the pressure he needs to act. She paused. He will send the mercenaries into the event. We will be waiting for them. Hae Mun-Hee was quiet for a moment. You want to use me as bait. I want to use your reputation as bait, she said. You've spent 20 years building something that makes people believe you are untouchable. Tonight that belief becomes a weapon. Park thinks he is hunting a man in hiding. We're going to let him think he's finally found one. The stillness on his face shifted into something she was learning to recognize. Not the composure he performed for subordinates, but the specific quality of focus that appeared when his mind was genuinely engaged. He was running the angles. She let him. I have 3 people in my organization I trust unconditionally, he said finally. Outside of you, who I trust conditionally and under protest. Good. Use them to seed the rumor. It needs to reach Park organically, through 2 or 3 degrees of separation. If it comes to him directly, he'll suspect a trap. I know how information moves through my own organization, he said, with a flash of the arrogance she had grown accustomed to, which under the current circumstances she found almost reassuring in its familiarity. Then start moving it, she said. And of your 3 contacts, Choose one to serve as our coordinator inside the gala. On someone who can be positioned at the venue without raising questions. She had already reviewed the personnel files she'd quietly copied 3 months ago. The logistics director, Shin. His record is clean and his access to event infrastructure won't read as unusual. Hae looked at her. You've read my personnel files. I've read everyone's personnel files, she said. That was the first thing I did when I started working for you. She let that settle. Shin will receive our communications on an encrypted channel during the event. He positions your loyal men at the exits before the evening begins. Nothing moves without his confirmation. Hae Mun-Hee was quiet again. A different quality of quiet than before. Not reluctance, recalibration. Fine, he said. We have work to do before Friday. The work was specific and unromantic. She sourced what she needed through channels that did not require her to show a face or a name. A dress, evening wear, the kind that photographed well and read as appropriate for a charity gala attended by the city's most performatively generous citizens. She chose it for a different set of criteria entirely. The fabric weight, the seam structure, the way the silhouette fell and moved and concealed. She spent an afternoon in the storage unit with a needle, a seam ripper, and components she had acquired separately. By the time she was finished, the dress was still a dress in every visible sense. What it also was, for anyone who knew how to look, was a weapons platform. A ceramic blade, undetectable by standard metal screening, seated along the left inner thigh. A secondary fixed blade at the small of her back, positioned for cross-draw. A length of reinforced cord worked into the hem with enough tensile strength to be useful in ways she preferred not to specify in advance. 2 collapsible steel pins disguised as hair accessories. One item she did not classify, sewn into the lining of the small evening bag that completed the ensemble. She looked at the finished result and thought, not for the first time, that the people who had trained her would have been satisfied. She was less certain how she felt about that. Hae Mun-Hee required less modification, but not less attention. He had spent 4 days in jackets that were not his, in rooms that were not his, making decisions that deferred to someone else's judgment. He had done this, she noted, with considerably less damage to his dignity than she had anticipated. But on the morning of the gala, he put on the suit. His suit, pulled from the apartment she had cleared and swept before allowing him entry. And something in the architecture of his posture changed. The deference receded. The controlled, glacial authority that had run a criminal empire for 2 decades resettled across his shoulders like it had simply been waiting. He stood in front of the window in the gray morning light and looked like himself again. Dangerously. Precisely himself. You understand what tonight requires, she said. It was not a question. I walk in as if nothing has happened, he said. I am visible, confident, and apparently unaware that my vice president has spent the last week trying to have me killed. I tell enough people, loudly enough, that I intend to make an announcement about succession. He adjusted his cufflink with the steady hands of a man who had made peace with being the most exposed person in the room. I make Park believe the trap is his. And if it escalates before we've positioned, then I trust your judgment, he said, and do exactly what you tell me. She had not expected that sentence from him. She did not say so. Don't stand near the east corridor after 9, she said. The kitchen access is there, and that's where they'll route the lead. Stay in the main ballroom, in sight lines, until I signal. What's the signal? You'll know, she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. You are a very difficult person to have working for you, he said. I'm not working for you, she said, and picked up the evening bag. Not tonight. The Meridian Foundation Gala occupied the top 2 floors of the Harlan Cultural Center, a building that had been designed to impress and had succeeded. all soaring atrium glass and warm amber lighting and the particular brand of elegant noise that wealthy people generated when they gathered to feel charitable. The ballroom held 300. The catering operation ran through a service corridor that connected to an industrial kitchen 3 floors below via a staff elevator. The security contractor for the event was a firm she had researched 2 days ago and found adequate but not exceptional. The kind of operation that was very good at making guests feel safe and not particularly designed for an actual threat. She arrived 40 minutes before Hae Mun-Hee, which was the plan. She moved through the space the way she always moved in rooms that required her to disappear. Unhurried, purposeful, precisely calibrated to the ambient expectations of whoever was watching. She identified the catering leads, mapped the staff rotation, noted the 2 security positions nearest the east corridor, and located the kitchen access point. She found what she was looking for in the 3rd pass. A catering supervisor whose credentials were a fraction too new, whose shoes were a fraction too practical, and whose eyes moved across the room with an efficiency that had nothing to do with canapés. One of them, which meant the others were already positioned. She located a second near the bar. Different posture, same eyes. A third at the southern entrance, wearing an event security vest that fit him the way borrowed clothing always did, are slightly wrong at the shoulders. The lead was not visible yet, which meant he was either outside or already in the kitchen corridor. And either way, that information was the most important piece on the board. She found a quiet alcove near the floral installation on the north wall and sent a single word to Shin on the encrypted channel. 3. Confirmation came back in 4 seconds. 2 characters, nothing more. The positions were set. Hae Mun-Hee arrived at precisely the moment she would have chosen for him. He came through the main entrance with the unhurried gravity of a man returning to a room that had always belonged to him, and the effect on the gathered crowd was immediate and subtle. Heads turning, conversations briefly recalibrating, the social atmosphere adjusting to accommodate a presence it recognized as significant. And he was magnificent at this. Whatever else she thought about him, she had never doubted that. Park Jin-soo was across the ballroom, standing with a cluster of board members near the champagne service, and she watched his face from 60 feet away when he registered Hae Mun-Hee's entrance. The smile stayed perfectly in place. The eyes did something much more interesting. He hadn't expected him here. He had been told, through the careful chain of rumor they had constructed, but some part of him had not fully believed it. Now he was recalibrating. She watched the calculation move behind the smile and recognized it as the same calculation she had made in the motel room. A man reassessing the board, determining whether his pieces were in position, deciding whether to accelerate the timeline. He would accelerate, and that was what people did when an opportunity they thought they controlled began to feel unstable. They pressed. She scanned the rest of the room before moving. It was in that scan that she noticed a board member near the east wall, a man she recognized from Hae's corporate filings as a non-executive director, someone who should have been nursing a glass of wine and making comfortable conversation. Instead, his eyes were tracking Hae Mun-Hee's path through the room with a quality of attention that had nothing to do with admiration or even curiosity. It was the attention of someone with an operational interest in the outcome of the evening. She filed his face, his position, the name from the filing, and set it aside. Tonight had enough moving pieces, but she would not forget him. She moved toward the east corridor. It happened at 9:14. Not the kitchen. She had miscalculated that by 1 variable. The first signal was not movement toward the east corridor, but movement toward Hae Mun-Hee directly, which meant they had changed the approach, and the catering mercenary near the bar was now 3 steps closer to the main ballroom with his hand moving inside his jacket. She was already across the room. She intercepted him at the edge of the ballroom floor, in the narrow gap between the champagne service and the string quartet, and what followed was not a fight in any visible sense. It was a conversation to all external observers. A brief, close exchange between two guests, one of whom appeared to stumble slightly, and then right himself, and then, quite abruptly, needed to sit down. She lowered him to the chair with the solicitousness of someone assisting a man who had perhaps had one glass too many, and by the time anyone looked twice, she was already walking away. The second mercenary near the southern entrance had seen it. She knew because he moved. And then, 2 seconds later, stopped, because Shin's man at the exit had been waiting for exactly that moment. She didn't break stride. The ballroom had not yet understood what was happening. That window was approximately 90 seconds wide, and she needed it. She caught Hae Mun-Hee's eye across the crowd. Not a signal they had prearranged, but he read it anyway, because he had been paying attention in ways she was only now fully crediting him for. And he turned, with perfect naturalness, toward Park Jin-soo. Moving to engage his vice president in conversation, publicly, warmly, in the middle of the ballroom floor, pinning the man in the most socially visible position in the room. The third mercenary was moving through the east corridor, which meant the lead was in the kitchen. She went through the service door. The industrial kitchen was running at capacity, the controlled chaos of a catering operation at peak service, heat and noise and the particular ordered frenzy of professional kitchen staff who did not have the bandwidth to question the woman who came through the corridor door with the focused expression of someone who had been sent to deal with a problem. She moved through the outer section and into the prep corridor beyond, where the noise dropped by half and the lighting shifted to the flat, fluorescent utility of a working space that expected no guests. He was waiting, but she had known he would be. He had cleared a section of the prep corridor. Staff moved past the far end without looking in, the kitchen noise providing cover. And he stood in the space with the stillness of someone who had also done the math and arrived at the same conclusion she had. That this ended here. That the two retreats from the office and the commercial building had been tactical, not fearful, and that he had been positioning for exactly this. She recognized his stance before he moved. The weight distribution, the way his feet were set, the precise geometry of his readiness. It was a language she spoke from the inside. She didn't name what that meant. She simply let it inform how she fought. He came at her without preamble, and she understood immediately why the organization had rated him so highly. And he was fast in the way that properly trained people are fast, not with visible exertion but with economy. Each movement so precisely measured that there was no wasted energy to read, no telegraphing, no hesitation. He fought like a system rather than a person. So did she. The first exchange cost her a hit to the left shoulder she had been protecting since the office. He had done his research, located the existing damage, targeted it. Smart. She filed this assessment away while managing the pain and redirected his follow-up into the steel prep table to her right, using the impact to create distance. Ceramic blade out of its seam housing, in hand, in the moment she needed it. He had a blade too. Of course he did. What followed was not the kind of fight that resolved quickly. It moved through the prep corridor with the ugly, grinding intimacy of close-quarters knife work. Controlled, precise, nothing wasted. Neither of them making the mistake of committing fully to an attack they could not recover from. She took a cut across her left forearm. She gave one across his right shoulder. The kitchen noise covered what sounds they made. The fluorescent light was indifferent. She was faster. He was stronger. They had been built by the same methodology and knew each other's patterns in the way that people know the habits of their own thinking. Intimately, and without being able to fully account for every variation. He made his mistake 6 minutes in. He feinted toward the damaged shoulder again, because it had worked once, and the instinct was to return to what worked. and that instinct was the gap in his training that she had identified and been quietly waiting for. She let the feint arrive, absorbed the redirected force, and drove her elbow into his knife wrist with every pound of leverage the corridor wall gave her. She felt the structural integrity of the grip compromise. The blade skittered across the floor. She put him down with two precise, definitive strikes that drew on the darkest and most certain part of her training, the part she had spent 3 years building a quiet life to avoid touching. Not fatal. She had chosen this deliberately, across the whole span of the fight, because dead men answered no questions, and she had questions she intended to have answered about who had resurfaced her name and sent him to find her. He was breathing when she stepped back. He would be breathing for a long time yet. He would also not be walking out of this corridor under his own authority, which was sufficient. She retrieved the ceramic blade, pressed her forearm against her side to manage the bleeding, and went back through the kitchen. The ballroom had achieved the specific kind of chaos that happens when something has clearly gone very wrong, and the people present are only beginning to understand what. Event security was moving. Guests were clustering and dispersing in the contradictory patterns of crowd uncertainty. The string quartet had stopped. Park Jin-soo was standing in the center of the room with two of Hae Mun-Hee's most loyal lieutenants on either side of him. Men Shin had positioned before the evening began. Park was not going anywhere. His smile had finally failed him entirely. And what was underneath it was the expression of a man who had run a very sophisticated play and arrived at the endgame to find that the board had been rearranged while he wasn't watching. Hae Mun-Hee stood in front of him. She would never know precisely what he said. She wasn't close enough, and the ambient noise of the disrupted room swallowed the specific words. But she watched his face, and she had learned enough about Hae Mun-Hee in the last 5 days, more than in the prior 14 months, to read the quality of his stillness. He was not threatening. He was not performing. He was simply telling Park Jin-soo the truth with the absolute quiet finality of a man who had survived something that was supposed to kill him and had come back to settle the accounting. Park Jin-soo's lawyers would be contacted within the hour. The financial architecture behind the shell company, the weapons trafficking through the logistics subsidiary, the contracted mercenaries, all of it had been documented and was already in the hands of people Hae Mun-Hee trusted more than he had ever trusted his vice president. The organization would handle what the law could not. Both things would happen in their proper sequence. Park Jin-soo understood this. She watched him understand it, and watched whatever he had intended to become dissolve quietly in the amber light of a charity gala that would be talked about in this city for a very long time. The office on the 63rd floor had been repaired with the thoroughness that money applied to problems always managed. New glass. New carpet where the blood had been. The desk refinished. The scatter of paper and tactical detritus erased as if none of it had ever existed. By the following morning it looked precisely as it had looked at 11:41 p.m. 6 days ago. Sleek, controlled, the headquarters of a man who had never been anything other than precisely in command. Hae Mun-Hee sat behind his desk and looked out at the city. His hand, resting on the mahogany surface, bore a faint scar across the back from the fragment in the commercial building. He had declined to have it treated cosmetically. She had noticed this without remarking on it. At 9 o'clock, the office door opened. Kathleen K. Johnson walked in. She was wearing a different white shirt than the one that had been destroyed in this room. The pencil skirt was the same, and her arm bore a clean dressing over the cut from the kitchen corridor that she would not let interfere with her posture or her pace. She was not carrying coffee. She was carrying a single document, which she placed on the desk in front of him with the same precise efficiency she had applied to 14 months of filing. He looked at it without picking it up. "What is this?" "My terms," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You're negotiating." "I'm presenting," she said. "There's a difference. You can read them or not." The position is the same either way. He picked up the document. It was not long. She was not a person who used more words than a situation required. Head of Security and Strategic Operations. Autonomous decision-making authority within the organization's risk infrastructure. Access to all internal intelligence, without filter, without delay. Compensation commensurate with the actual function of the role, rather than the administrative fiction of the previous one. And one final item, at the bottom, to which she had given more thought than any of the others. The right to operate independently, to make unilateral calls in the field, to be accountable to outcomes rather than to process. Not an employee's right, a partner's. He read it to the end. He set it down. You plan to leave, he said. I plan to survive, she said. Leaving was the strategy. This is a revision. He was quiet for a moment. Then, why this building? Specifically? She had been expecting the question. She had decided, on some time between the gala and this morning, to give him a real answer. Your security infrastructure is the most sophisticated in the city, she said, and your name, in certain circles, functions as a deterrent. The international agency that trained me does not move against organizations that carry your level of institutional risk. Coming after me in your building would have cost them more than I was worth. She paused. You were the best available blind spot. Your organization's secrecy was my cover. The expression that moved across his face was complicated. You were hiding inside the fear my name generates, without my knowledge, for over a year. Yes. And you chose to protect me anyway. The night of the attack. The mercenaries would have killed me too once they finished with you, she said. It was a practical decision. He looked at her with the particular attention of someone who understood that she was being approximately half honest and had decided to accept that for now. And yet you stayed. The geometry changed, she said, which was as close to a full explanation as she intended to give him. He was silent for a moment. Then, your organization is structurally compromised at the executive level, beyond Park Jin-soo. Yes, I've identified at least 2 additional vulnerabilities. One is in your procurement chain. I found the indicator in the shell company's financial records and held it until I was certain. She let that settle. The other is a board member, non-executive director. He was at the gala last night, and he spent the entire evening tracking your position through the room with the kind of attention that has nothing to do with board governance. I have his name. I have his file. I'd like to discuss both of them in my new capacity. Hae Mun-Hee said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the city conducted its morning business with complete indifference to everything that had happened in the preceding 6 days. The compensation line, he said, is accurate, she said. It's generous. It reflects the market rate, she said. For someone who has saved your life twice in 1 week and intends to continue operating at that standard. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the contained predecessor of one. The expression of a man who had decided to find something genuinely useful rather than simply difficult. He picked up a pen. He signed the bottom of the document. He pushed it back across the mahogany desk with 2 fingers, the way he signed off on everything, with the assured economy of someone who made consequential decisions as a matter of routine. You start Monday, he said. I started 6 days ago, she said, and picked up the document and walked back out of the office. He watched the door close behind her and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a room that had been a fortress and a battlefield, and was now, for the first time, something that might accurately be called the beginning of something entirely different. He looked at the city. He looked at the scar on the back of his hand. Then he opened the next file on his desk and went to work. Do you think their love can survive what's coming next? Or is this where everything finally breaks? If this forbidden story has you hooked, go ahead and like this video. You already know you're not ready to let it go. The next chapter drops soon, and the truth about who Kathleen really is will change everything. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has reached, and I'll see you in the next one. If the real Kathleen survives.